So periodically when scrolling through social media, I'll see the Skullcrusher come up and see examples of how supposedly this angle or this position is wrong, bad, or killing your gains. And I will go over some of my thoughts on the tricep extension today. Talk about how I don't believe any of those angles are necessarily wrong. You can do incorrect form on this movement like any other, but it's not necessarily about a certain angle. You're just going to bias different aspects of the tricep a little bit differently depending on what angle you're going in. And so I hope that this clears up some of that confusion. So I'm going to kick back and show you what I'm talking about here. So traditionally, when people do skull crushers, coming to the forehead and then back up roughly over shoulders, and that's a pretty traditional skull crusher relying tricep extension. And this variation in particular is the one that I see get dogged on the most as far as being wrong or bad somehow. There's nothing wrong with this old school variation, which is coming right to the forehead. In fact, it's in my routine right now, has been for quite a while. It's just going to work the tricep in a little bit more of a lengthened biased resistance profile, which may seem confusing because we know that the tricep itself is stretched more when the arm is more in extension overhead. So you would think the further you come back, the more lengthened bias that would be. It's going to lengthen the muscle more, but the weight is actually going to be falling off a good bit as we come down here. So I'm getting a lot more load at lockout here than I am at the stretch. Versus here, where I have almost no load because it's stacked right over my shoulder joints. And right about here is where I have max tension actually, with my forearms almost parallel to the floor. So I have a little bit of drop off as I can hear in the forehead, but nothing crazy. So if I wanted to maximize that and get the most out of that lengthened position, it would actually be more of about a chin crusher here or a JM press like fashion. And that's actually why J.M. Blakely, from my understanding, developed more of this style of tricep extension, is because he was really trying to get down into the elbow, more into the tendons and ligaments of the elbow joint and strengthen those up a good bit. So that's really what I'm getting at here, is the further forward you bring those elbows, the more the load is going to be stressing this aspect of the tricep in more of a lengthened biased position, and then the load dropping off as I walk it out. Versus as I start to work my way back here more, the further my elbows come back, the more the resistance starts to bias this aspect of the tricep more in the middle of the muscle belly. And then as I start to get back here, I start to get more emphasis in this area. But as I come back this way, I'm not getting as much load down towards the elbow anymore, but I'm also not getting as much load in the stretched position because again, the weight is dropping off here. I am not feeling a ton of work here. I can hang out here for a while versus here at lockout where I really feel that light up even with just this empty bar. Now we could turn this into more of a rolling tricep extension where you come back into this stretch and then lock out more like your traditional skull crusher. And that's a great variation. I used it for quite a while as well. But you're still not getting that peak resistance at the lengthened position like you would at more of a skull crusher or chin crusher, which doesn't automatically make that bad, just different. If you're trying to work your triceps in more of a stretched position on a skull crusher, you're actually going to want to be more somewhere in this chin to forehead range. Somewhere around there. Now, if you want to work it in more of a contracted position, actually being back here and locking out more behind you, that's going to be a better idea. and who that might feel better for is someone who is struggling with elbow issues on tricep extensions in particular, which I would also recommend having this not be your first heavy tricep movement. I'd recommend doing something to warm up those elbows first. But coming back here and challenging yourself more in the contraction and letting that load drop off as you bend the elbows more, that's going to be easier on that elbow joint instead of harder, while still giving your triceps some good work, just more in a contracted way. More similar to like a row pushdown or something like that. Now again, the muscle is lengthened because you are overhead, but the load drops off. So despite this being stretched, it's being stretched under minimal load. It's being contracted under higher load. So that's the big difference there. And that's really what we're looking at when we're doing skull crushers or tricep extensions. There's a whole spectrum of where we can position ourselves and how we can challenge the triceps and potentially how we can alleviate some of the discomfort of the elbows that I know some people run into in doing these. I used to as well. I've just been patient with these movements over years and built that up to where as long as I'm warm, I can challenge myself in a traditional skull crusher position quite well and run into no elbow issues. So I want to wrap this up with just the conclusion of there really isn't a wrong angle to attack this from. If you see any of those videos saying skull crushers to the forehead are wrong or bad, back here's where you want to go, or to the chin, whatever, you can pretty much ignore that because they all are valid and they all have their place. As long as you're using an appropriate amount of load for an appropriate amount of reps with good control, from there it's just really whatever you're trying to accomplish with your tricep training. A little bit more stretch, a little bit more contraction, more load towards the elbow, more load towards the muscle belly. Play with it and find what works best for you. But as long as you're training whichever variation consistently and it feels good for you, you're going to see good tricep growth because no matter what position or angle you get into, it's working the entirety of it. When we talk about biasing a muscle, we're talking about just a little more stress at different regions of the muscle, but that's it. The entire thing is still having to stretch and contract through any of these movements. So don't get too hung up on that, but I hope that this is a pretty good explanation of how there's variation within this one movement and how it can be useful. So let me know what you guys think, what angle you prefer to attack skull crushers from, or whether you even call them skull crushers or tricep extensions in the first place. Like, subscribe, all the YouTube stuff, and I'll catch you guys in the next one. Thanks.